Up next on Book TV, a visit to the National Press Club's annual book fair in Washington, D.C., where author Earl Swift spoke with us about the struggles of a 200-year-old crabbing community in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay.
We're here with Earl Swift. He's a residential fellow of the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, the University of Virginia. He's the author of 5 other books, but his most recent is this book, Chesapeake Requiem, A Year with the Watermen of Vanishing Tangier Island. Mr. Swift, where is Tangier Island?
Tangier's smack in the middle of the widest part of the Chesapeake Bay, where the bay is about 30 miles across. So it's an hour and change by boat to the nearest mainland port. It's a tiny little speck of mud and marsh out in the middle of 18 trillion gallons of water.
450 people live there?
Give or take, yeah. That's just...
Why did you get interested in Tangier Island?
I went there initially as a newspaper reporter and was struck by just how odd and interesting it was. It's unlike any other town in America. I mean, it's so isolated that it has its own style of speech that it's developed over the last 240 years. And every islander can trace his or her lineage back to those first settlers in the 1770s. And yeah, it's a factory town devoted to catching crabs and oysters, and there just aren't many places like that left on the planet.
A lot of people may know Tangier from the fact that it was separated from the mainland, and they have a very unique style of talk, almost colonial in nature. But you got interested in it because of the climate aspect. Tangier lost 2/3 of its land since 1850. Is that correct?
That is right. Right, and that. Initially, that is not what took me to the island, but of course, once I was there and went back several times, I found that each time I revisited, I was visiting a much smaller island. And when I went back to write the book in 2016, the changes by that time were profound. Close to 20 years had elapsed since my first visit, and the effects of not only sea level rise, but the island's subsidence into the bay were unmistakable wherever you looked.
For our viewers, paint a picture. What's the infrastructure like on the island in regards to roads, power?
Roads the size of sidewalks, about 1.5 miles of them altogether. About 275 houses, most of them small, wood frame, 2-story. About a century old. It's essentially treeless. 80% of its area. We're talking an island about 1 mile wide by 3 long. 80% of it is salt marsh. So at high tide, most of the island floods. You know, the water comes right up into the marsh, and at astronomical high tides comes up out of the marsh and over the roads and into yards and makes getting around pretty difficult. It's got a school, the only K-12 school left in Virginia. It's got 2 churches with a very dedicated congregations. It's one of the most storied Methodist congregations probably anywhere in the country. The Swain United Methodist is known throughout the Mid-Atlantic, especially as a place with particularly scholarly congregants. And it's a place partly because it's board flat and only inches above the water and treeless and without any interruption to the horizon. It's a place of sky as much as it is water, that surprised me when I moved there, was just how much the sky figures into your environment when you're walking around the place.
We're here at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the Mid-Atlantic. We're right near the Chesapeake Bay. Devotees of the blue crab this side of the country. How does the climate change and the rising of the sea, how is that affecting the crabmen? How is it changing how they make a living?
Well, right now it's not, but that's just right now. It will. The crabs depend on lee waters. They depend on protection from wind-driven wave action, because that protects the bay grasses in which they breed and such. And without a Tangier, they're going to be missing a huge piece of underwater pasture land that is vital to the blue crab. But the crabbers now, I mean, their main issue is that their very home is slipping beneath the water. I mean, it's an existential threat that they're facing. It's pretty tough to get out in your crabbing boat if you don't have a house to go to the boat from, you know, and so they're. I think that they're a lot more worried at this point about not so much what happens out there in the fishery, but what they come home to at the end of the day.
What are the scientific forecasts in regards to the livability of the island 10, 20, 30 years from now?
The Army Corps of Engineers, 3 scholars from the Corps of Engineers put together a paper they released in 2015 that suggested that the island had less than 100 years. It had 50 to 100 before it would be uninhabitable, and the authors have since modified that estimate because climate change is accelerating at the sea level rise is accelerating at an ever higher rate, and the current forecast seems to be 25 years tops, pretty much, before the challenges of living on the island just supersede, the practicalities of living there.
How do the residents receive that information? What do they think? Are they ready to go, or they refuse to believe that it's going to happen?
Well, this is a deeply religious place. I mean, faith is figured in Tangier's day-to-day life forever, and I mean, they're on an island in which they can control very little about their environment, and that environment has a strong role in their day-to-day life. So perhaps not surprisingly, they have, to a large measure, put it in God's hands, I'd say. This is this deeply Christian, old-school Christian. These are not like mainland Methodists. These old-school Christians have pretty much come to see themselves as an anointed people. They've been spared from hurricane after hurricane trundling up the bay. They've been spared by killer epidemics that should have taken them out but didn't. Any number of things. The crab harvest that collapsed but then came back. So this is another great challenge that they hope to see divinely headed off.
Earl Swift, his book has a blue crab on the cover. It's called Chesapeake Requiem, A Year with the Watermen of Vanishing Tangier Island. It's published this past summer by Day Street Books. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for more interviews from the National Press Club's book fair to air in the near future. You can also watch them and any of our programs in their entirety at booktv.org. Type the author's name in the search bar at the top of the page.